Hi, I'm Slice.
And I'm Emily.
And welcome to another episode of Home Records, the podcast where we, two married musicians, pick an album at random from our 2,000-piece vinyl collection and discuss its personal and cultural importance. How are you doing?
I am good.
Yep.
We're recording at night, so I'm a little sleepy.
Yeah, we didn't get a chance to record when we usually do, which is usually in the morning. So we're doing in the evening this time around.
I know. And you bribed me with coffee. You said, do you want to get your coffee? But I said no, because I'll stay up all night long and can't do that.
Well, unless you do need to get something done.
Yeah, maybe I should be getting coffee. Honestly. Not the worst idea, to be honest.
I mean, I
or I could get we've got this weird mushroom placebo coffee in our kitchen. I could just fake it. My body can pretend I'm having coffee.
It does taste pretty good, though.
It honestly does. Big fan, actually, of mushroom coffee.
I think I actually tend to be pretty productive in the evening more so than in the morning.
Yeah, we're definitely night owls here.
Yes, although we do get tired because we're very busy during the day with the many things we do.
Yeah, I really think we need to stop this wonderful thing called working all the time.
Yeah.
I think we should just, F off to an island somewhere and early retirement. What do you say?
I think everyone should take that advice.
And
I think people do work
I feel like
I'm
having an outer body experience where I'm like, did that sound bitter? I did not mean for it. I freaking love work. I am a workhorse. I really am. It's what I love.
Well, see, this is going to be interesting because it's late and we're slightly tired, so we're going to see if that creates any new any new effects to what we're talking about, how we talk in this podcast.
I definitely feel a little goofy.
Yeah,
you don't know what's going to come out today.
Yeah, and it'll be especially interesting for the album that we're talking about today, which is so far, quite a departure from what we've usually talked about. So this time around, we're talking about a hip-hop record.
Yeah.
And not just any hip-hop record, probably the best hip-hop record of the 2010s, and really, in my opinion, probably the best hip-hop record of the last 20 to 25 years.
Yeah, you're obsessed with this record. I feel like the last record was an obsession of mine, and this is an obsession of yours.
Well, don't get me wrong. I was definitely plenty obsessed with Golden Hour. For this record, I was definitely obsessed with it, but kind of in a different way.
Yeah.
And the record we're talking about in this episode is To Pimp a Butterfly by Kendrick Lamar.
Drum roll, please.
Yes, drum roll. Well, that's a late drum roll. The drum roll has to come before I say the album title.
See, guys, I am tired.
We are leaving that in. So this album originally came out in 2015, and I actually remember buying it on CD at the time it came out. And I just remember so many classmates of mine, because I was going to school for music in Chicago at the time, and I had a lot of friends that were talking about this record. And so I took it upon myself to be like, oh, I'm kind of curious about it. I had kind of known about Kendrick Lamar up to that point because previously he had performed at the Grammys with Imagine Dragons, and that was kind of what you could say was a breakthrough performance for him in the mainstream. And at that time, he was nominated for his album Good Kid, Mad City, which was the album that came out before. It's the album that came out before To Pimp a Butterfly, and it was critically acclaimed. It was a hit record. It had some hits on it. I heard some of those songs up to that point, but I definitely wasn't in Kendrick yet. But I think I did at least listen to it. You know what it was? I bought Good Kid, Mad City at the same time as I bought To Pimp a Butterfly. So I actually bought those CDs the same day, but To Pimp a Butterfly had come out. So that was my introduction to the records. And I heard Good Kid, Mad City, and I liked it. I thought it was a really great record. But then To Pimp a Butterfly just totally blew my mind.
So when did you buy the vinyl then?
Oh, I bought the vinyl probably a few years ago. I wasn't really buying a lot of vinyl in 2015 yet. I was buying some, but not really a lot. So I bought the vinyl just a few years ago. And this is like a regular pressing I have. They've since reissued it for its 10th anniversary last year, but mine's just kind of the standard version.
And then for me, I had never heard of this record until I started dating you.
Mm-hmm.
That is that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, honestly, because most of my other favorite albums came out before I was born, this album for me is what I would consider the best of that has come out in the years since I was born.
It was an interesting time when this record came out. It's something you have to talk about, like 2015.
Mm-hmm.
When it came out, what was going on as a culture. To be honest, I think if this record came out right now, it'd still be just as relevant.
It is, absolutely.
But the narrative that we've seen around, Black Lives Matter, the political and racial tensions that we've walked through as a country in the last few years, that is all... this record was at the beginning of a lot of those conversations starting, really.
Well, and some of those conversations had started because of a lot of the police brutality events that had occurred 1 or 2 years prior. But also in a lot of ways, this record definitely foreshadowed a lot of things to come.
Right.
Yeah. You said you had listened to this record just when you started dating me. I think I played you this record in the car once, and I know you re-listened to it for the podcast episode.
Yeah.
So what did you think of it overall?
Oh, I think it's a very dense record in terms of this is not easy listening. This is a record to listen very intentionally and to try and understand what is really being said. Because he is saying a lot. Every single track has a lot packed in.
Yeah, so you can't be a passive listener in this record at all.
Yeah, so I will be honest, I had to listen to it twice. The first time, I think it's one of those records where it just takes a minute to digest more than other records.
I will say for myself, as far as the lyrical content, there were certain parts of the lyrics that I think stuck out to me more because a lot of the songs are riddled with hooks,
right.
And those hooks really, I think, spoke to me on an emotional level. I kind of understood the overall message, but also for me, because I was very familiar or was becoming very familiar with a lot of the musical styles that were incorporated into it, because this is a hip-hop record that features virtually all live musicians as well as beats. So, a lot of musicians that had, that were really up and coming around that time. You had Kamasi Washington, Terrace Martin, who also helped put a lot of the beats and arrangements together. Kamasi Washington, who had come out with his triple album, The Epic, that year as well. He did the string arrangements. Robert Spitz-Searwright on drums, who had just previously played with Snarky Puppy. So you have all these, and Robert Glasper as well, who was pretty much sort of the contemporary Herbie Hancock, if you will. So you had all these jazz or these would-be jazz giants that were featured all on this record. And they created this, I would say, a musical adventure, this musical landscape, this foundation for Kendrick to wrap his poetry around. So it was that part, because I was into a lot of that music at the time, which going to college for music, you tend to kind of become familiar and acclimate to, sort of the virtuoso type of musicians and that sort of jazz fusion type of thing. Because that's what the album musically has a lot of. It's a lot of contemporary jazz and jazz fusion, which, and at that point, was blending a lot of neo soul and R&B influences, like it hadn't before,
Well, just in your life too, you were in Chicago, which is such a heartbeat for a lot of those influence and
It's
genres as well. So it just for you in your life, that would have really hit at the right time.
especially with the musicians I was surrounded by.
Right, yeah.
Especially people that were, came from gospel backgrounds, from those R&B backgrounds. And again, a lot of that bled into jazz and jazz fusion that was being created at that time.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, that's something I love about the record. I love the different moments, sonic moments in this record. You hear jazz, you hear funk, you hear gospel, you hear just all of it is woven through in a very intentional way.
And I would argue that Kendrick's rapping is also part of that arrangement. And even the lyrics aside, the way he raps and the way he delivers is also its own instrument.
Right.
And it's such a wonder of how his delivery is juxtaposed in the same way, a saxophone would improvise in that moment. I mean, it's like saying his voice is like a saxophone. Maybe not necessarily in timbre and sound, but definitely in phrasing, definitely in how the rhythm is juxtaposed with everything else going on. So that's to say, however dense the lyrical content may be musically, it's the richest, if not one of the richest musical records that I've ever heard. And
especially for rap. I feel like it really changed the game.
Mm-hmm.
That to me was, there is a clear before and after this record in that genre, because in the last, at this point 10 years, right? It's been 10 years since this record.
Yes.
So so many people who I love in that genre, like I'm obsessed with Doechii, Tyler the Creator,
yeah.
They do things like that, of blending genres within rap and bringing up so much character inside rap. And it really does go back to this record kind of allowing that interpretation and for to say the sonic palette of rap isn't just beats. It can be anything you want.
Exactly. And that was the thing, because before that we had sampling, and you could do that. You could create these collages of sounds into beats through sampling. And over time, slowly there was more live instrumentation that would be incorporated. But in my opinion, I feel like To Pimp a Butterfly is one of the pinnacles of that approach to really blending live instrumentation. A little bit of sampling here and there, and there's some tracks that we'll talk about that and do incorporate that. It's just at a whole new level at that point. And so
I will say, like, for me, I feel like rap and hip hop and this genre is something I've gotten into later in life.
Same. I was never really into hip hop that much as a kid. I heard some of it, like, because that's the thing. Growing up with hip hop in the 2000s is kind of a mixed bag.
Yeah.
And I say this as someone that, as much as I enjoy researching about music, and I've researched hip hop, you go back to the origins of hip hop, and it's such a rich history of how things were created, how things were instinctively innovated, just without any precedence, you know, and how that's evolved over time. And then you had all these different facets of hip hop coming in the 80s and 90s. And in the 2000s, there was really great hip hop, but for the most part in the mainstream, a lot of that would just be mostly party jams. And, like I've said before, I'm not against dumb fun, but when it came to things that were as lyrically deep or as musically interesting, at least for me, I know there's great stuff that came out of that era now, but at the time growing up, I was not very aware of it. Granted, I was not really into pop music at that time, and that includes the hip hop that did become mainstream with a few exceptions, but none of it I felt was like that deep for me.
Yeah, and maybe that's why I mean, maybe it is. Maybe it is just the way the game has changed, where what they're doing now, I appreciate more. I mean, that could definitely be, I'm just not super well versed to be able to say that, but what I've heard that is just honestly blown my mind, and it is on this record, is just the way they create the track. So it's the different sonic palettes they're using. It's using the lyrics in a very rhythmic way where it's not just rapping, it's spoken poetry, and things are said in certain ways that bring attention to certain words and inflections. And it's so fascinating as somebody who is a singer, you know, it's just like, it's a different way to express feeling. It's just in a totally different category of art to me in a lot of ways. And it's inspiring when it's done at this high of a level.
And I will say that growing up in the 2000s, there was definitely this thing happening where hip hop was so popular in a way that, I mean, like you had white rappers like Eminem and things like that. And to me, that was some of the most memorable hip hop that I remember growing up with. I didn't really get into Jay-Z until later on, and he started in the 90s, but into the 2000s. But I just remember, like, I would meet people that grew up with hip hop at that time, and they could rap all the verses and things like that. Friends of mine that were, you know, white, black, Latino, or whatever. And the funny thing for me is anytime I try to, like, learn a rap song, I do stumble. And I think about that. Probably the closest I could ever get to being able to replicate someone's flow is like Trugoy from De La Soul, because they have a song. This is a side note. They have a song called I Know. And when Trugoy does his verse, I'm like singing along, and I'm like, okay, my flow's kind of like his. So it's like, yeah, if I was rapping something like this, that was a little laid back, not as forward. It's like I could. I don't know if I would ever pull off Kendrick's lyrics in terms of his delivery, you know. And that's the thing about Kendrick, is he is a very singular artist in that way, and he's very intentional with how he wants something to be created, or what he wants it to say, both musically and lyrically.
Yeah, like just listening to someone like him, like I said, it's such a different genre than what I do, and it's such a different medium to work with. It's like, for me, it's like if I'm working with oil paints, it's comparing to someone who's working with clay. Like, it just feels different. But yet, if you work with oil paints, I feel like learning from someone who works with clay just stretches your mind. Mm-hmm. It just makes you go, oh, I had never even thought to, you know, try that kind of technique. That wasn't even in my toolbox. And that's how I feel listening to records like this. It just kind of expands my mind on what is possible, because it just doesn't, you know, every genre uses certain rules in their songwriting. And so when you listen to something like this, where it's, you know, the height of this genre of rap and hip hop, but it's so different from what I do, it just stretches your mind on what is possible.
And I feel that's why Kendrick wanted to work with these collaborators on this specific record, you know. And again, some of these artists were legends, some of them were up and coming. You think of Thundercat, Flying Lotus. Again, I mentioned before Robert Glasper and Terrace Martin, you know. So I think Kendrick wanted to stretch himself musically as much as he could too, because he does know music. He does understand it, and not even just at a hip hop level, but just as a musician himself. You know, it's easy to pigeonhole hip hop artists as just being, maybe for lack of a better term, one note, so to speak. But with Kendrick, he really created this like a musician would. You know, he took all these ideas and gave it the direction that he wanted to deliver this message. And let's get into that message, what we think that message is, or how we interpret that, because there's a lot of themes that are explored on this record that are both personal to Kendrick, but also, like you alluded to before, speaking to the times that it had come out in and possibly was foreshadowing.
Yeah, I mean, this record, I mean, to just put it very bluntly, is the story of a black man and his narrative in this time. I mean, that is the foundation of this record. I would say for me, you know, I think listening to this record, that is so clear that I'm listening to this record as an observer. But I can imagine someone who is a black man or a black woman listens to this and feels so seen.
Mm-hmm.
You know, but I learn a lot from this kind of record.
Would you say it's, because I also hear it as that, but it's also like a black man that has found success in America.
Yeah.
And what that means for himself. Does that change who he is? How does he grapple with his identity after he has found acceptance in these worlds that he never thought he would or think about? You know, what is that?
Yeah.
What is that? How does that change him, or how does that define him?
Right. And especially, you know, Kendrick talks so much about being from Compton.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's all over this record. And especially with what you're saying, you know, how do you go back to a place like Compton after the kind of success you've had?
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I mean, he talks about the gang life that he experienced all over this record, and, you know, and just the poverty and the different things that he saw growing up. And does that leave you? Does it stay with you? Have you commercialized it, which is such a which is a hard thing, I think.
That's a very complex.
That's a very complex feeling.
Yeah, and Kendrick's has revisited that theme time and time again in different records, and part of that has evolved into a savior complex that he explores the depths of in this record and in other records to follow.
He does a beautiful job in this record, and I mean, just this is part of his narrative as an artist, of that, you know, what you're saying about being a savior for his community, but also there's so much of a survivor's guilt on this record as well. And I think that's you can feel him grappling with that.
And it's not just the people from his community, but it's also like the people that idolize him now after the success. Yeah. And, you know, is that real? Is that not real? You know, there's a lot of paranoia, a sense of paranoia that's explored in this record that so at the time I heard this record, the album that it made me think of almost immediately after I heard it, that I felt like thematically was the most similar was The Wall by Pink Floyd. Because, so just really brief synopsis, The Wall is based on Roger Waters' upbringing, being the child of a World War II father who died in the war when he was 3, and he's growing up in England in World War II, post-World War II, and is surrounded by all these things that really have created internal trauma in him. And while Pink Floyd were on tour for Animals in 77, 78, he had an incident where he got mad at someone in the audience and he spit on them, and then the show ended, and that became the catalyst for writing The Wall, because The Wall is about a character who goes through all these experiences, and he starts to develop these delusions or illusions, if you will, of becoming a World War II dictator, overcome with power because of success, or just like sort of these delusions of grandeur, you know, from this paranoia of like, I need to control things, I need to control myself when I'm not in control.
Yeah.
And so that's why this album, To Pimp a Butterfly, reminded me a lot of that, because it feels like the main characters are going through a similar arc.
Right. Yeah, I can see that. I don't remember. I remember reading about it when I was researching the album, but the phrase "to pimp a butterfly," do you remember what the metaphor is about?
I'm trying to remember at the top of my head.
If I remember right, you know, obviously caterpillar to a butterfly, it's the evolution. But I believe to pimp a butterfly meant, you know, going back and kind of using your life as a caterpillar when you were not fully evolved and commercializing it. If I'm remembering right, is that kind of...
Yeah, it's basically about exploitation.
Yeah,
you know,
that's the word.
It's the exploitation of yourself before you're fully formed, which, I mean, if an artist doesn't relate to that, I don't know who does.
Or just, yeah, I mean, I've actually been just reflecting on this in my own journey, because there's this funny thing that happens when you embrace being an artist. There's a moment where you just kind of stop and you're like, yep, this is who I am, this is what I'm put on earth to do. and you think that you're going to go out and you're going to put out music and do all these grand things, and really what it ends up being is a journey back to yourself and where you come from. And you realize that really being an artist is just sharing the story of where you're from. But then it creates all these strange feelings of, oh my gosh, am I taking advantage of sharing about my hometown and sharing about everything I did growing up, and taking every heartbreak or every love story that you've ever had and making it into a product. It's a very, very odd thing to do. But at the end of the day, that's your job, is to be a mirror on whatever you've experienced in life as an artist. But the psychology of it and walking through that is very, very odd and very niche, I would say.
And I think what also happens along the way is that you feel that every now and then you're creating something that maybe feels like either just a stepping stone or a misstep. And for whatever reason, those are the things that get you the most attention or get you the most success. And sometimes you end up resenting that because you feel like this was not your best thing that you had made. This is not you at your fullest potential. You know, people like you, but you feel like they don't like either like the real you or the person that or the artist you're trying to become. There are some artists that have, I think, mastered or learned to master how to ebb and flow through that. I think of artists like David Bowie, he was able to do that. And but that's very rare. And that's a big reason why sometimes some artists either flame out. Well, they flame out, and that can be because they're coping with, through drugs and substances and things like that. And their mental health state becomes unstable as well.
I think the artists who I see, I'm not going to say they have an easier time, but I do think artists that are kind of characters. Like, yes. Bowie's a character.
And he's created a lot of characters.
And he's created a character. Chappell Roan is definitely a character artist. There are certain artists that is actually literally their product, is to create an on-stage character that's larger than life. And I think those have a little bit of an easier time because it feels removed from who you are as a person. I feel like it's kind of hard when your artist journey, you're more of an everyman artist.
Yeah.
And your product, essentially, and that's what's so hard, is you're taking yourself and you're becoming a product, which is a really psychological, funky thing to do. And
I feel Kendrick definitely represented more of a persona probably on Good Kid, Mad City.
Yeah.
But
persona, that's the word I was looking for.
Yeah, but then with To Pimp a Butterfly, that's when he's discussing the dichotomy of that, this how people perceive him versus who he really is. And we're mentioning also that a lot of that in the album is actually represented in these small dialogue interludes that evolve over the course of the album. It's basically the To Pimp a Butterfly poem, if you will, or at least that's what we're calling it, and it evolves into each new track that it comes right before, because it's evolving, the story, it's evolving his ever-growing paranoia and trying to get back to himself.
Yeah. I mean, there's some really fascinating tracks on this record.
Well, let's dive into some of those.
Yeah.
I think it's a good time to. So I just want, right off the back, the first track, which it starts with a sample of this song, which is actually a Jamaican quasi reggae song, which I cannot repeat the title of, but it goes right into the song of Wesley's Theory. We hear George Clinton, saying "hit me," and then immediately we got that drum groove. Thundercat's bass enters, and then he's starting to sing a little bit with Kendrick, and then he's singing. Kendrick's rapping, Thundercat's singing, and that leads into. I mean, a lot of people like to talk about for records like a 1-2 punch of a beginning of a record. This has the very rare, in my opinion, very rare perfect hat trick of an intro to a record, and that is Wesley's Theory into For Free into King Kunta.
I would agree with that.
Yeah. That's one of the best.
It's a very captivating intro.
Yeah, and it doesn't let up. It just keeps the momentum there. And of course, For Free, is what the title suggests, is it's a free jazz track with dialogue and Kendrick rapping over it. In very much a way that a saxophonist would improvise over a jazz a jazz track or a jazz rhythm as well. And that, of course, leads into King Kunta, which I think was actually the first song I heard from the record before it came out. It was the single, actually. So I heard that song before it came out, and I'm like, oh, this is cool. And then hear it in the context of the record just totally blew my mind even more.
Yeah.
And there's some great interpolations in that song. There's a James Brown interpolation. There's a Michael Jackson interpolation. And this is the song where Kendrick is expressing, where you're at the height of your powers and now you're starting to understand what you're capable of. That's how I interpret it.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I love King Kunta. Like, it's a track about pride and power and ownership. It's so fascinating how the tracks are put together. That's the part that I really, really love. And that's what I mean by you have to intentionally listen to the tracks and the way they're put together. I don't know how many people have thought about, you have a choice when you're creating a record, the amount of seconds between a track. You get that choice. And there's so many songs on this record that have no space. It bleeds right into the next. And that is purposeful.
Yep.
Because it's not, here's a song, here's a song, here's a song. He is telling you a story from beginning to end, and hold on tight and pay attention.
And that's a trend he's kept up with certain records from time to time. Probably most recently, Mr. Morales and the Big Steppers, which is a record I love, but I only listened to it once. It's like, maybe we'll cut this. It's like watching the movie Grave of Fireflies, the Ghibli movie. You will watch it once, you'll say it's the greatest movie ever made, or greatest animated film ever made, and you'll never want to watch it again. That's how I feel about Mr. Morales and the Big Steppers. But I digress. With To Pimp a Butterfly, I could listen to this album over and over again. Honestly.
I do think it's important to say the track that I think most people would know, like the single off the record, is All Right.
Yes, which retroactively became the anthem of Black Lives Matter.
Which is justified. Honestly, like, if you're going to pick a record to take an anthem from, this is the record to do it. Honestly.
The funny thing is that the music video for that song, All Right, actually didn't come out until maybe a year almost after the album came out. And I think it was motivated by Black Lives Matter being pushed forward. But what's interesting about the music video is that it actually incorporates a couple of snippets of Kendrick tracks that were never released, never put on any album. There's another companion album to this one called Untitled Unmastered, and it's kind of the leftovers that were recorded during the To Pimp a Butterfly sessions. There's no real cohesion to that record, but there's some great tracks on that, and you could kind of see how they could have musically at least potentially been incorporated into this album. And that's to say, and the reason I bring that up is because, again, in the music video for All Right, it has a couple things that were never released. And when Kendrick performed at the Grammys, when To Pimp a Butterfly was nominated, he performed a medley of Blacker the Berry and All Right, and then at the end he did this sort of monologue rap song with the band playing, of course. One of the best Kendrick lyrics I ever heard, that was never released. People would have only ever been able to hear it at that Grammy performance. And that lyric was an extension of the themes of those songs like All Right and The Black of the Berry, which both of those songs relate to those themes of being a black person in America and fighting for equality, or fighting to not, be exploited by the powers of America.
Yeah. And just on that note, there are 3 tracks that I wanted to highlight, which is Blacker the Berry. I thought that track stops me in my tracks. I just think that the way that's said is fascinating. I mean, just blatantly about race.
And sort of the
know.
comparisons of
Yeah.
like how racism is discussed, how it's dealt with,
Yeah.
and how what is that, what what is, maybe not what is the solution, but is this the way we need to be talking about it?
Right. And I just like, I think what I love about this record is sometimes I feel like race, and I know this conversation right now is a very like intellectual conversation about it, right? Kendrick is not speaking about this stuff from an intellectual point of view, like, oh, I'm thinking about it, da 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 da. No, Blacker the Berry is like, this is how people are talking about this in my home. This is how people talk about this in my friend group. This is how people talk about this. Like, this is how my friends talk about this. So let's talk about it. Let's get it on the open. And I just love that. I feel like he's the perfect person to talk about that.
With great nuance and understanding that it is a complex situation.
It is complex.
And he's not, I mean, that's the thing about his lyrics is like...
He holds all of that complexity so beautifully.
But the thing is, he can sound complex in his lyrics, but he's not being pretentious about it either.
Exactly. It's not intellectual. It's not pretentious. It's just like, dude, this is what it is.
Yeah,
and I just really appreciate that.
I think that's one of the biggest misconceptions with Kendrick that some people have when they have a hard time really getting into his music or his style of rapping is it's not even connecting with it. It's more of just trying to understand that place that he's coming from and understand what he's trying to say. And the thing with Kendrick is, one of the most interesting facts about him is when he was growing up, one of his great mentors was his English teacher. And it was his English teacher that really encouraged him to practice writing, to practice, poetry in some ways, So that was very much the catalyst for him to, I think, pursue this as an art form, as something, as a craft to really aspire with.
Because it's a craft. You cannot listen to this record and not realize it's a craft. And so many people, I feel like, I feel like hip hop and rap is sometimes the underdogs in that, where people don't take it seriously in that way. If you listen to the greats, the records that people are doing, I mean, you have to admit that it's beautiful. I also wanted to mention, I thought Hood Politics was super interesting.
I had a feeling you were going to mention that.
It's a really interesting track. And also Institutionalized. I just think that track, again, it's just truth. It's a hard truth for us to hear, and we need to hear it.
Mm-hmm. And that's followed by one of my all-time favorites from These Walls, which he's also, I think he might have performed that too at the Grammys, or it might have been some other award show, and that features Bilal and a Wise and Thundercat as well. That's just got a great musical backbed, with the guitar lines and the groove there. It's kind of one of those like very smooth grooves, but it's still in your face at the same time. And the other two or three ones definitely to highlight How Much a Dollar Costs, which I remember that song being on Barack Obama's summer playlist of I think it was either 2015 or 2016, because every year he puts out like a summer playlist or just a list of his favorite songs of the year, and that was one of the songs he highlighted from that record specifically. And I think probably the most visceral track on this album, and which is saying something, is probably You.
And then I later on,
which I is the complete opposite of that.
Yeah, but I just love I just love how the record's crafted, and the fact that you have a You section, you have an I section, you have these tracks that are, it's just fascinating.
And now I'm remembering, actually, I was the first single.
Yeah,
but I don't think I listened to it, or maybe I listened to a little bit of it in passing. But King Kunta was the first song that I heard before the record. But I was the first single. That was kind of the initial radio song. All Right didn't really become a hit until later on.
But that you feel like that's the biggest song now.
It is the biggest song, absolutely. And for all the reasons that we mentioned.
Yeah.
But yeah, You is probably my favorite, just in terms of thematically what it's doing. It's Kendrick playing these characters in these different states of mind. It's like he's playing the different characters that are in his head that are fighting against each other. That's really what. And if you watch the music video, it kind of gives that impression as well. And again, that's why I referenced The Wall, because there are songs on The Wall by Pink Floyd where it is these different characters, these different devil on your shoulders, so to speak, that are fighting to tell you what to do and what not to do. Yeah. And that's where it all really comes to a head. And then that's when he realizes that's when he has to start setting himself back just to get back to himself. And then, of course, we get to the end of Mortal Man, which he replicates this interview with Tupac when Tupac was still alive, and basically trying to sum up like the complexities of the themes discussed, racism, brutality, black identity as being successful in America. And this might go without saying, but I think it's worth pointing out. When we are referring to success for Black Americans, I mean, you have to consider the history of America and how Black people were treated and seen in America in pre 20th century and even further. I will say that I think during the lockdown there was this collective consciousness that definitely came to a head in the wake of George Floyd's murder that I think really made people really seriously sit down and think about, how do we want to educate ourselves and how do we want to understand and discuss these themes, these ideas, this history, and I think it has made a difference in some ways. Obviously there's still work to be done, but at least for a moment you could see that it seemed like the entire population was on board with this idea of like, yes, how can we improve what the things that America was not great at before.
See, we were in very different areas of the country when George Floyd happened. Mm-hmm. You were in the middle of Chicago.
I was here in Nashville.
You were in Nashville.
That was in 2020.
Yeah,
you hadn't moved yet here, but you were about to.
Yeah, I was in a very rural area working for a mega church at the time. So very, very different experience. But what I will say is I do think that situation made people wake up. Yes. Made people grapple with it who had never realized racism was a thing. I mean, I had such different conversations. I was having very odd conversations with people who did not even realize that there was racism today. Mm-hmm. So I don't know if I would go as far as to say everybody was on board.
Well, I think it was, at least for me, probably not since the civil rights movement, which I obviously wasn't alive for. Not since then has there been a very large consciousness, overall group consciousness within the country in really speaking up about these injustices and racism in America at large.
Everybody had to grapple with it. Mm-hmm. Everybody had to face it.
It affected everybody in a way that, again, not since the civil rights movement we've never seen.
Yeah. I do think that is true.
And I honestly think this record, To Pimp a Butterfly, really did foreshadow that, but in very natural ways.
Yeah, I think what I appreciate about this record for me, if it had come after that situation, would have mattered just as much, but it would have felt differently. To me, this record proves what we've known, which is all those issues and all those rumblings and all those things that we had to come head to head with during the George Floyd thing were already happening.
And they were,
And they were, in the Black community for years and years and years. And unfortunately, George Floyd I think it woke a lot of people up who could live in a very privileged place of not understanding that.
Yeah, but because of, the technology that we have access to, it's very easy. Everyone saw it. It was undeniable.
Yeah. I did want to say something about ending with the Tupac.
With the Tupac interview, yeah, incorporating that into the ending. Yes.
One
Mortal
thing
Man.
that I think I've always just felt a little sad for him. I feel like he holds a lot of weight on his shoulders to be a good example and to speak into a community of people. And man, I think that would be hard. I think that would be so hard. And I feel like it is such a beautiful idea to end with an interview with Tupac as almost like a, hey, you've done this.
Right, exactly. That was the reason, is because Tupac
Tell
was
me how to do this well.
Yep, Tupac was in the same exact position, just like NWA before.
Yeah.
And in terms of the artists that talked about, you know, coming from Compton and having those experiences and what that means in the grand scheme of, you know, being from America.
That'd be so hard to hold. And I don't know any other artist who holds that much weight like that in that kind of genre and that kind of art and that just community. I just think it's a uniquely hard thing to do.
And I think for Kendrick, that's because he cares about it and he's able to deliver those thoughts and emotions in a way that could connect with people. And in this album's case, not only lyrically, but musically as well.
Yeah.
And again, I think these are the ideas and themes that Kendrick has explored throughout, you know, the records that came out after To Pimp a Butterfly. So albums like Damn and Mr. Morales and the Big Steppers. Not so much his more recent record, GNX. That's definitely like Kendrick's, as close to Kendrick's commercial party jam record as he's gotten so far.
Sure.
You know, but the other records have also had heavy themes on that. I like Damn. I'm not the biggest fan of that album, although that was the album that actually won him the Pulitzer Prize. He was the first hip hop artist to.
That is really bad. I mean, I get it.
Yeah.
I get why he would have won that.
And I mean, even since To Pimp a Butterfly has come out, even in 2020 when Rolling Stone put out their new list of 500 greatest albums of all time, but then a few years later, they put out their list of greatest hip hop albums, and Kendrick's was put in the top 20, which I don't think anyone should take lightly, really. I know it's Rolling Stone. I know it's a whole political thing, but to have an album that's only a little more than 5 years old be in the top 20, I mean, I think that says a lot about not only how great this record is, but how important it is for hip hop and for culture at large. And that's the thing about Kendrick, is anything he's done has always been in service of the culture, of hip hop culture, of black culture, of the culture that he comes from and he represents. And I think in the long run, that's what's helped him keep his head on straight, is that he always remembers where he comes from and knows that he is trying not necessarily trying to save anyone or feel guilty about getting out, but more of saying, like, the best I can do is just speak about where I come from and share my observations as honestly as possible.
So was it this record that he won the Pulitzer for?
Damn was.
Oh, Damn was.
Damn was.
Okay.
To Pimp a Butterfly, I mean, Good Kid, Mad City put him on the map, but To Pimp a Butterfly just skyrocketed him. That was a #1 record, and you know, in my opinion, it should have won the Grammy for Best Album.
So I was gonna say it did not win Best Grammy or Best Album of the Year. Though.
Yeah, lost to Taylor Swift's 1989. I'm still salty about that, by the way. And it's not that I don't like 1989. It's just that To Pimp a Butterfly was clearly the best album of that year. Again, I feel
and the themes it was addressing.
Yeah, but I mean, just as a piece of art overall, you know.
Yeah.
Again, 1989 is a great dumb fun pop record. Again, I'm not against dumb fun, but to me, and I listened to both albums that year, and I'm like, or actually 1989 came out in 2014 after the contention period, but to me, To Pimp a Butterfly was just a better record, and there were other albums that were nominated that year too that I thought were better than 1989 anyway, but yeah, no, but then Damn, the album came out a couple years later. That won the Pulitzer Prize because that was also a huge hit album too, and it had the hit Humble on it. I actually got to see Kendrick live in 2016 in London. He was playing Hyde Park, and he was still touring for To Pimp a Butterfly, so I got to hear a good amount of those songs in his hour-long set. He played right before Florence and the Machine, of all people.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's interesting.
Yeah.
So
And-
here's my question.
Yes, go on.
Would you recommend this to kind of a first-time casual listener for Kendrick?
That's a very good question.
It's a hard one. It's a hard record.
I mean, if you're looking to choose violence, maybe, but
Jump in the deep end, friends.
but that also, I think, depends on the sonic palette that you're used to,
Yeah.
because, nowadays there's so much genre bending that happens in nearly all music, especially hip hop. So if you're into the genre bending that fuses that neo soul jazz fusion, that this album, not that this album didn't introduce that, but it definitely, did it at a whole new level, then you can dig right into this and just go off to the races. If you want to start with something softer, then my recommendation would be Good Kid, Mad City or Damn. Either one of those albums, because both of those albums have more sonic similarities to each other than to Pimp a Butterfly.
Yeah. Well,
do you want to do the two questions?
Yeah, I feel like we're at a great time.
We're in an excellent time.
Go us. So we always end our podcast with the same two questions. The first one is, why does this record, To Pimp a Butterfly, matter to the culture?
Well, once again, I think that this album really pushed hip hop forward in a lot of ways. I think it spoke to a lot of people at that time, and it foreshadowed a lot of ideas and themes that we as American people, and even in some cases people of the world, had to grapple with and understand. And musically, it's just such a rich album. It's musicianship at its best, and Kendrick is one of the finest hip hop artists of all time, really. And even this, which is for all intents and purposes his third album, you know, just to be coming that far out of the gate with it, you know, you got to listen to it with headphones. That's one thing I'll say with it, because that's how I first listened to it. You got to listen to it with headphones in the dark, which is how I was told to listen to Pet Sounds by the Beach Boys. So I went the same route. But you're just going to find yourself, I think, in this very interesting world and be exposed to something that maybe you didn't realize was there before. And it's important to the culture, you know, because of where it stands in hip hop, where it stands in American music. And this is an album that stands the test of time. And I don't say that for a lot of albums that have come out in my lifetime, but this one definitely does the most in from my life experience. I
would also say, like, does this record matter to the culture, or is it just a reflection of the culture? And I think it's really the latter. Like, this record is just a great timestamp for what was going on with people at this time.
I agree with that, but time will only tell when its relevance will be revisited, which tends to happen with the greatest records, you know, because even if you take out the cultural element into it, you might find yourself having a personal connection with it from your own experience. And maybe not even just as being a black person, but just really anyone that struggles with that dichotomy of
identity
between identity and persona, how people perceive you versus how you perceive yourself.
Yeah, that's a good point. Like, race is definitely a big part of this record. That's why we have to chat about it. But it's built for everyone.
Yeah, it is. And Kendrick, I think, is very intentional with that, sort of very subtly.
Yeah,
you know?
Definitely.
Yeah. And what's the second question?
Second question is, why should someone listen to this record? Why would you pull it off the shelf and say, hey, I think you should check this out?
Because you are going to reward yourself with a very enriching musical and lyrical experience that is very unique to this record in particular, and also unique to Kendrick. And especially, I think even if you're not into hip hop, I think if you're into other genres, or maybe you're, historically hip hop has not always had the most positive rap, so to speak. But I think even if you're not as much into the lyrical or the rapping component to it, you could still get a very enriching musical experience out of it just by listening to the instrumentals, just by listening to, the saxophones and the bass lines and the keyboard parts and just all this happening. And maybe one thing to take away is think about listening to Kendrick's rapping like you're hearing John Coltrane play his tenor sax, or Jay Dilla is making his beat with his sampler. Think about everything as an instrument and how it's all combined and juxtaposed, and how that creates this great work of art.
Yeah, that's why I would say someone should listen to this record. It just is a truly great work of art. And I think as somebody who's maybe not as familiar with this genre and this style, again, I just think it really stretches your mind on what is possible when it comes to expression.
Absolutely. Well, thank you everyone for tuning into this episode of Home Records. If you like what you've been hearing, you can follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever podcasts are available.
And if you'd like to show your support, please give us a 5-star review below, and be sure to spread the word to all your friends, family,
and enemies.
Thanks again, guys, and we'll see you next time.
Bye, everyone.